You've reached the final video in the pharmacy residency interview series, and today I want to talk to you guys about a few tips when it comes to panel and group interviews, plus additional tips for interviews in general, just to round out this entire series and make sure that you guys are prepared going into your interviews. Hi, I'm Dr. K and welcome to my channel where I help you live your best life by sharing advice and tips to help you grow personally so you can thrive professionally. So when it comes to the pharmacy residency interview process, there are a few unique interview styles that I have experienced in my years of applying to pharmacy residencies, and that is specifically the group interview and the panel interview. So I really wanted to make sure that I dive into both of those individually just to give you guys a few tips in the event that you do find yourself having an interview like that this year. I do feel like it may be a little less likely because I do expect that most interviews will be virtual this year. But if you come across this video in years to come, the same would still apply as far as these tips. And so I still thought that it would be important to share them. So let's start with the group interview. First of all, let's talk about exactly what I mean by a group interview. This is typically an interview setting where you are being interviewed along with the other interviewees, so your other peers and the people who you're going up against. It's not something that I've seen anyway happen a lot specifically with pharmacy residency interviews in a formal setting, but I have had a few interactions where it was kind of informal, yet it was still technically interviewing all of us all together. I think maybe like 4 candidates. And so with this, you really want to keep in mind how you interact, not only with the person that's asking the questions, but how you interact with the entire group. So the first tip that I have here is that you don't want to take over the conversation. You don't want to be the person that's over talking everybody and the first one to immediately respond to something that someone else says. Give other people in the room an opportunity to respond and engage as well. The next tip I have is to not take over the room. And so taking over the conversation versus taking over the room to me are two different things, because you'll have one person that overtalks everyone in a conversation, but then you'll have the other person that takes over the room, meaning that they have to be the take charge, almost the life of the party type of person where they bring the fun or excitement and all of that to the room. And that's not what you're there for. You may typically be that type of person, whether it's a party or with coworkers where you bring everybody together and you kind of help raise the energy and all of that. That's cool. But in an interview setting, that's not what you're there for. They're there to get to know you and the other candidates. So you don't want to take over and dominate the room and the environment and the energy that's brought into that environment. The next tip that I have is to not try to one-up the next person. And this one is a big one because this can be very annoying and it can say a lot about the type of person you are. And what I mean by one-upping a person is that when someone says something or responds to a question that was asked or have a statement, then now your immediate response is something to now downplay what they've said, to now highlight something you've done or said to make yourself look better. And that's not a good look, because what you don't want to be is that person that cannot let someone else shine and someone else have a voice without you having to now interject and make it be all about you. There's a way that you can engage without making it seem as if you're one-upping a person, because what that does is it makes it seem like you're saying whatever they had to say is not valid, it does not matter, and nobody cares. And you don't want to be that person, especially in a residency setting, because if you have co-residents, you're going to have to work around them and work in unison with them. You'll have your own individual rotations, but you may have group projects together. And if you don't, you still want to have a good environment with your co-residents. So if you're in a group interview setting and you're doing this, that's going to give them a sign that you're not going to be the type of person that's going to mesh well with other residents, and they may not want to choose you because of that. And the last tip that I have for the group interview is to engage with the other interviewees. And so with this one, if they say something that you can then elaborate on or piggyback off of, then please do so. This is something that is different from the one-up that I mentioned previously. In this situation, if someone says, for example, that I remember a situation where it was a group interview. Like I said, it wasn't super formal, but it was technically a group interview. And they were asking us about things that we like to do outside of work. And so one of the girls mentioned that she was really into fashion and hair, and you know, she elaborated on that a bit. And then when it kind of died down, like I interjected and added that, you know, I thought that was amazing. I'm not really big in hair. Like I try to make my hair look nice, but I'm not really that big into it. And so I thought it was really neat that she was. And I was able to kind of build a conversation off of that where she said something, and although I didn't fully agree, I could show some appreciation for the fact that she was, and then I was able to go on and elaborate on things that I like to do as a hobby and in my own spare time. And so that is what I mean by interacting and engaging with the other interviewees and kind of feeding off of each other. In that example, I didn't come out in a way that one-upped her by saying, okay, well, you like to do hair, well, then I like to do this. Like, there's a way to do it where you're interacting and engaging and not trying to seem like you're putting other people down. All right, so let's move on to the panel interview. The panel interview can be one of the most stressful interview types because it is you against the world, or at least that's what it feels like. Like, I know I had a few panel interview settings, and one in particular was at a VA facility, and I tell you, it was the most stressful thing in the world, y'all. Like, it was literally me and about 12 other people around a table, and each one of them took turns asking me questions, and I was so done by the time the interview was over, because not only are you stressed because it's an interview, but now you have all of these eyes on you, and every single one of them are critiquing you on each individual question, and it was a lot. So because of that, I do want to make sure that I give a few tips on the panel interview in the event that you find yourself in this situation during your pharmacy residency interviews. So the first tip that I have is to pace yourself and focus on your breathing. In that type of environment, you may start to feel like you're getting rapid fire questions one after the next, and it can tend to be a bit overwhelming. And if you start to feel like that, the best thing to do is just to pace yourself, take a moment to breathe. If you need to take a sip of water, that kind of puts a pause there, because if you're drinking water, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to try to jump right in and answer and ask you another question. And if you do get an immediate question right after that, then you may say, can I have a moment just to take a sip of water? My throat's getting a bit dry. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Just putting those buffers in where you just give yourself just a minute to breathe and gather yourself before you go into answering the next question is very important. The next tip I have for the panel interview is when answering questions, make sure you make eye contact with everyone in the room. The person that asks the question, yes, you need to start with interacting and having eye contact with them, but you do want to make sure that you still engage with everyone else as you go throughout answering your question. I know this is something that can be challenging, because I found it a bit challenging to do, because you're so focused on remembering what you want to say and getting it out in a way where it's clear so they can understand it. And so the last thing you want to remember is to try to look at every single person in the room, but try your best practicing doing that, at least some, because you don't want to make it seem like you're focusing your energy just on one person. In the event that you can't do that and that is just a lot for you, then just try to focus on looking at the person that did answer the question. The one thing that you absolutely do not want to do is to solely focus on one person the entire time. So don't come into that room and focus only on speaking to the RPD or only to the director of pharmacy and leave everyone else out, because if they're in that room, they're important and they're there for a reason and they can critique you. And if you aren't looking at them and engaging with them, that can be seen as a negative thing, as if you don't see them as important enough to matter. The next tip I have is to have questions for each interviewer. And this, again, could be challenging, for one, because you may not expect to be in a panel interview. I know for my case, I was not expecting to be in a panel situation like that. Plus, depending on the number of people in the room, it really may be challenging to even come up with enough questions for each individual person. But if you know in advance that you'll be in a panel interview setting and you know who you'll be interviewing with, please try to make sure you do your research about them and what their career interests are and their goals and things like that, that you can connect with them and ask certain questions that will be specific to them and what they do in their current position, or what their goals may be as far as their career or past experiences, or whatever the case may be. The key is you really want to make sure that you're engaging with everyone in the room during a panel interview setting. Okay, so lastly, let's briefly talk about just a few additional interview tips that I may not have touched on in previous videos, or it may be to elaborate and re-emphasize some things that I've already said. Okay, so the first tip that I have is to make sure you take every single interaction seriously. I know during these interview settings, whether it's individual interviews with different preceptors and RPDs, or if it's in a panel setting, people tend to focus so much on the RPD because they think that that person is the sole decision maker and I have to impress them. But the reality is that anyone that interviews you has a voice and has a say and can impact whether or not you're ranked and how high you're ranked. Preceptors specifically carry a lot of weight because they're the ones that are really interacting with you, sometimes more than the RPD is. I know also sometimes we tend to not let the residents have a lot of impact and weight because we're thinking that they're somewhat kind of like our peers, but residents have a lot of say as well, especially if they're doing a sit down actual interview session. Even if they aren't, if it's a general lunch setting with residents or the site tour with residents, you still want to take those interactions as serious, because I know for myself during my residency, our RPD came and sat down with us and talked about each one of the candidates to see if we had any feedback about them. And we didn't do specific sit down actual interviews with them. It was simply the site tour and the lunch that we had with them. I remember one time specifically, and this was during my residency actually, when we were interviewing for the next year's candidates, in the session where you come in and everyone kind of gives their feedback, there was a specific candidate that the director really did not want to rank. They were very adamant about not wanting to rank this person. And of course, they had their own specific reasons based on their individual one-on-one interview with the person. But because of everyone else in the room, the RPD and preceptors and everyone else that had good things to say about that person, they were outnumbered. And so that's a perfect example of how someone that would normally carry a lot of weight, or you would think carries a lot of weight, they were outnumbered by everyone else in the room. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you take every single interaction seriously, because you need to impress everyone. Oh, and did I add that the person that the director did not want to rank did end up getting ranked, and they actually matched to the program? So that goes to show just how important everyone else's opinion really is. Okay, the other tip that I have is in the lunch setting. If you have a group lunch either right after your interview is over or even the night after, which I've had some situations like that where it wasn't immediately after the interview, whatever it is, if there's a group interview setting where you're with the other interviewees and someone from the site, take it seriously. That is still the interview. And so even though you're not in a specific interview setting and you can relax some, you don't want to get too comfortable where you're still not engaging and making sure that you put your best foot forward. And I think I drove home the point enough when it came to how important it is with the interactions with the residents, but just to make sure that you don't miss it, it really is important to make sure that you impress them as well. Even if you don't have a specific sit down interview with them, it still matters. I remember one time we had a guy that was interviewing for my residency program while I was still a resident, and he did exceptional on the interviews apparently based on the feedback that everyone else gave, but he did not impress us well at all. And that did impact how high he was ranked in the end. Now, whether or not it would have made a difference about whether he matched or not, I'll never know. But the higher you rank, the better off your chances are of matching to their program. So you don't want anything to get in the way of you being ranked as high as possible. Okay, so that wraps up today's video about group and panel interviews and those final additional tips for the interviews in general. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video, but also the entire interview series. And it really was helpful with preparing you guys to go into your pharmacy residency interviews this year. If so, please make sure you give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone else that may find it useful. If you have not checked out the other videos already, I definitely suggest you do so. And if you enjoy the content here on the channel, please make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out when I upload new videos. Going forward, I will be sharing a few more videos about pharmacy residency things, pharmacy related things in general, and just overall life tips and things that can help you guys live your best life well beyond residency and anything beyond. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and until next time, peace.